Sean, hi.
Hello, Gavin. I will not ask you how you are after last
No,
week.
no, not at all. Chris Scott. We agreed on Chris Scott, I think.
That's right. I forgot. I
Yeah,
forgot.
no,
But
no, no, I liked it too until you mentioned it in the first place. I'd completely
a
forgotten.
friend of mine who watched our discussion and enjoyed it very much. She said to me that she has the same kind of sense of bafflement or existential discomfort when people ask her that question. Doesn't bother me because I think I'm lucky enough to be a sociopath. So when I ask people how they are, I don't really care about the answer. Like I don't not that bothered if they ask me or not. But
Oh, what a blessed state to be in! To
mm,
have sociopathic immunization. That's just brilliant.
mm.
Because if you don't have it, I mean, I really, after all these years, I really do experience a moment of panic when someone says, "How are you?" And I go, "Oh my God, I don't know the answer to this question." And if we break it down, at what I'm just repeating myself. So no, grüß Gott, thank you very much. Or actually, I sometimes just as a matter of antipody and mockery say good day because I think that's great. Good day works very well for me.
That's more of an
Uh,
instruction than a question. That's why.
well, when you've you're dealing with hidden authoritarian impulses, it's nice to let them out one at a time. So it's
I'm not
fine.
really a sociopath, by the way.
I don't really think I'm dealing with authoritarian impulses, but always better to accuse yourself before people get there, which is why I think people liked our ridiculous title last
Mm,
time. Two
mm.
two uber bombastic has-beens discussing beyond the limits of their well, in my case, my competence, but not yours.
Well, in
We're
my
going to talk
case,
about something very difficult today. So this was ambitious, but let's set our disclaimer out. We're going to talk about the reality of evil and technology, in particular, artificial intelligence. I know why it interests me. Why does it interest you?
it interests me because my PhD was in the philosophy of artificial intelligence, which I suppose just defers the question: why was you PhD? What interested you back then?
Yes.
Um, it's interesting to me that something I wrote without having really any faith at all 30 odd years ago has come to seem more and more relevant. When I wrote that thesis, I was interested in problems about the nature of consciousness. I wasn't really interested in where AI reliance would take us. So it's kind of an interesting confluence of things for me there.
You see, I know why I want to interrupt you all the time, as people have criticized me freely for doing. It's because every so often you cram three interesting things into every sentence, and then I want to grab them before they disappear because they really are interesting. So, can you just tell me what it was about consciousness that interested you? Because it strikes me as being so a subject of such enormity. Uh,
Mm.
I mean, almost like the kind of way in which we laugh at them, at the scholastics for supposedly debating how many angels there were on the edge of a pin. And may we say nobody ever did that. That's a piece of pejorative propaganda against scholasticism. But nonetheless, there's a sense of, but this is such a difficult and abstruse question. What did you think you'd achieve when you went in to do a PhD on consciousness?
I wanted to debunk reductionism. I was presented as an undergraduate with a set of assumptions about the nature of the proficiency and scope of science. And I was taught philosophy of mind the way that people are. So we did Descartes, we did the empiricists, and then we did 20th century reductionism. And all of that seemed to me to make the assumption that the mind and the brain were definitely related to each other. It was just a question of how and whether that relationship was one of identity or one of emergence or whatever the case may be. And it seemed to me to be and also there was a school of let's rewind slightly. There was a school of philosophy that was emerging from America, and it was a version of scientism. It was an ideology, and it was called eliminative materialism. And these were people with tenured jobs, professors, one at California. No, I think they were both at California. Husband and wife team called Paul and Patricia Churchland. And they were looking at the nature of consciousness, and they were saying that consciousness poses a problem for science. and specifically for neuroscience. So their solution to this, which I thought was ingenious, was to actually make the claim that consciousness doesn't exist. We just think it
Mm.
does. And I thought that in the face of such, you know, almost preternatural conceit and arrogance, that this was something that to become interested in. So at the same time, there were certain developments happening in artificial intelligence, which kind of dovetailed with that. So I kind of my interest coalesced around those things.
There's a
And
very
also, if I'm honest, also I had a tutor who's passed away now, passed away very young actually, called Steve Mills, who was interested in these things, and he was a bit of a mentor to me. We used to drink a lot together and smoke joints together, and that was his area of interest, and I kind of inherited it. So there was that kind of reason as well. So the sociological and the academic were kind of came together nicely for me. But you're right about you're
I, I,
right about
I was busy trying to butt in, but only because I mean, fascinating to go over this reductionist thing, saying it's too much of a problem and a challenge to our
hmm,
presuppositions. Say, well, pretend it doesn't exist. There was something very similar to that in the psychology of religion, where a woman called Susan somebody, once again, an experimental psychologist given to reductionism, took this whole business of people, a ubiquitous, a very common experience of going down a dark tunnel towards the light, which of which there are so now in particular there are so many accounts. And in order to deal with it, she said, "Well, of course, this is just a piece of malinterpretation. Essentially, what people were doing was inhabiting their own neural systems,
yeah, that's
and
similar.
it's the same kind of trying to
Yeah,
sidestep and not deal with the evidence in an open-minded way, but bring a prejudice to bear upon the way in which you interpret the evidence."
yeah. But they wanted to say, in fact, they still do say this, that when you are making first person phenomenological reports, so something simple like I've got toothache, you're actually not just saying that you've got toothache, you are operating with a theory they called folk psychology. You've got a very rudimentary theory of what's going on in your head. And as the brain sciences develop, that theory will gradually become replaced by a more developed language of the brain and of neurology. And they actually envisaged a point in time where the brain sciences were sufficiently developed that this thing called folk psychology, how we describe ourselves, how we describe our conscious mental states, would be displaced by by a new scientific paradigm. That ludicrous? That's why I said it was an ideology
Yeah,
rather
well,
than
it is an ideology, and I mean
yeah,
it's actually terrifyingly stupid. And I think of sort of going to some of my parishioners when I was a vicar in a council estate and asking them, and they say, "But that's just stupid." Rather than going down there, you talked about the difference between the mind and the brain. Can I just ask you if we can, if either at some point or even now, whether we could include the soul as well? I'm not the brain. I understand in the sense that it's a piece of electronic hardware.
yeah,
The mind I don't understand. How do you get from synapses flashing to I've got toothache, and
mm,
then I want to bring the soul in, partly to deal with the fact that when people have terrible brain injuries, there's a sense that somehow there's still somebody there, and it's not the brain, and it might not be the mind, but it certainly would be the soul if we're right. How do you distinguish between those three in your in your in your discipline?
yeah. I think it's just a matter of a kind of usual practice, as much as anything, not to talk well, not to assert that the mind and the soul are the same thing. I'm happy to say that they are.
Yeah, they
On,
might be, mightn't they? That's all. They
yeah,
might.
yeah. I don't think there's any need. I think it's always perhaps good to avoid promiscuity if you can. Um, so I mean, when people talk in the philosophy of mind about the mind, they mean conscious mental
Yeah,
states
yeah,
such
yeah.
as pains, thoughts, beliefs, desires, acts of will as well. They're lumped in there as if they shouldn't be disaggregated from acts of knowledge and intellect. I'm happy to use the word soul in place of mind,
Can we
but
do some nat-
try
can
getting
we,
published if you do that.
no, you won't at all. Can we do some natural theology? I think I think I have an intimation of three. aspects of me. I mean, then there's a whole business of I and me in other sentences. Which I is it? Which I is it that's got toothache?
Yeah.
Um, but I think I have a sense of my soul, mainly when it needs confession, or mainly when there's something, dry cleaning or something, that I think I can feel distress of soul, or even longing of soul. My soul longeth and fainteth, um, as uh, as the psalmist has it. And I think it's different from the mind.
Mm.
My mind does acrobatics. My mind organizes things. My mind is a muscle which gets tired and can get fitter or less fit. And
Yeah.
my brain, I don't know anything about it, but I see it. I see it's there, and I see it's the hardware housing what I feel is two different forms of software. To use the analogy, does that
Yes, I
make
think
sense?
that's a good way of putting it. Or perhaps you could say that what's important is that we have, if you like, an interiority, and that maybe the soul is the ordering principle of that interiority.
That's a
So
lovely posh word. I like that. That's very good. And the
yeah,
interiority, yeah,
yeah,
yes,
we have a sense of ourselves as being conscious beings with an I attached or with an I infused in that, and that maybe the soul is the ordering principle of all of that. I'd be happy enough with that. You know,
yeah.
I
No,
think.
that's very good. I like the idea of an exteriority, the brain, and a kind of
Mm,
middle interiority, the mind, and an interiority, the soul. Partly because, in all my understanding of the Holy Trinity, I understand the
mm,
progress of an encounter with God, to start out there with the Father, to move
mm.
alongside in the Son, and then to pierce the depths in the Spirit. So there's always this. So the experience of God is always one of progression from the outside to the in. And so far, I quite like the idea of balancing the Trinitarian God with a kind of Trinitarian form of infrastructure,
Yes, I
um,
think that's a good way.
brain, mind, and soul.
Yeah,
Um,
you've persuaded me. We will keep hold of the Trinitarian impulse then, and agree to describe it in those terms.
but you're very kind to accept my primitive
But
warning.
going back to these people, the limited materialists, I kind of had a sneaking admiration for them because they they reminded me of mafia bosses. You know, it's like this guy's a problem, so what do we do? We'll make him
Rub
go
him
away.
out. Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. We have
this,
ways
this
of making you disappear.
this normal and this normal way that people have of describing themselves as having these mental states is actually a problem for the sciences. So let's get rid of it. And because to try and identify the mind and the brain, to go back to the old usage as being the same thing, brings with it all sorts of problems. Because you want to say that a toothache or a pain just is identical to this set of synaptic firings in the brain. It's a very rudimentary way of putting it, but let's just put it that way for the moment. Well, why is it that such an identity doesn't account for the fact that it feels like this? Philosophers talk about things like qualia and the phenomenal components of consciousness that do not seem to sit well within any materialistic science of the brain.
That's
So the
very
limitatists say, well, fair point. So we'll deny that people have them. They just think they do, which is an absurd position. But ideology makes you believe absurd things. So
well. The most absurd version of it, I think, is the Dawkins phenomenon, which I think is exactly an example of the mafia boss at work you've described. I've always believed that intellectuals say they don't believe in God, and are atheists, because effectively what they don't want is any moral accountability. And if you can get
mm,
rid of God or the first cause, then they're morally untouchable. The idea of declaring something as non-existent when you can't prove it's just as you say, the instinct to rub out that which you don't like. And so it seems to me that Dawkins and others, the four atheists of the apocalypse, did exactly what you suggested. The idea of God is uncomfortable. It puts us under a certain amount of ethical pressure. We'd like to be free of it. Therefore, we declare God doesn't exist.
yeah,
QED.
yeah, yeah. I think that's true. I mean, you had. I mean, who were they? You had Dawkins, you had Hitchens, you had Dennett, and you had the other guy. What's his name? Sam Harris.
That's it.
Dennett did some reasonably. In fact, Dennett was a more than proficient and more than competent philosopher in the 70s and 80s. He wrote a very good book called Content and Consciousness, which is excellent. Dennett was no fool. Um, but Hitchens was Hitchens. Sam Harris doesn't seem to understand the stuff, and Dawkins kind of was talking outside of his area of expertise, I think, and came up with these. I mean, read the God Delusion. It's
It's
extremely.
very poor.
It's sixth form stuff. It's a
Yes.
sixth. It's a
Yeah.
bad rehash of
Yeah.
stuff that you can read in Kant.
Can I tell you a
Um,
Dawkins story?
but I was going to make a quip then. I was going to say that reminds me of they were representative of the new atheists. It's like what Trump says about the Venezuelans. They didn't send their best, did they?
No, they didn't send their
Sorry, I
best.
interrupted you that
No,
time.
it's quite all right. No, I I mustn't do the Dawkins story. There's no need for it. And anyway, it's facile and fun. But let's do the serious stuff first of all. If we've got time left over, we can do facile
Yeah,
and fun.
we'll go back to the AI stuff. I,
So,
my thesis was basically it had the structure of what logicians call a modus tollens argument, which is if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P.
right,
So I was trying to say that if this, what was then a newish set of AI theories called connectionism, if they were true, then it implied a theory of the mind which was pretty much like these limited materialists were offering, where consciousness doesn't really exist. And because I think limited materialism is incoherent and at the very least false, then it follows that these connectionist models of the brain weren't going to be, you know, they weren't going to be good ambassadors for a position known as strong AI, which is the view that you could build machines or systems which are genuinely conscious like we are.
mm,
And I think for purposes of this discussion, it's essential to make a threefold distinction, actually, going back to our Trinitarian impulse, between intelligence, consciousness, and then self consciousness. And
I was
those are
just about to ask you about intelligence. Yeah.
three things which are different in kind from each other, but which are normally lumped together.
Yes, because it is literally artificial intelligence. It isn't artificial consciousness. But the
No,
problem is, um, I tend to say rather like some people, but I mustn't do that. We mistake intelligence for consciousness because it mimics it, but it's not the same thing at all.
no, no, that's right.
How
We're
would
kind
you,
of,
how would you, as a professional, describe the difference between intelligence and consciousness? And while you do that, I'm listening, but I'm just going to put a log on my wood burner, which is dying down. So I'm. Can you fill 60 seconds of the unforgiving minute with the distinction between intelligence and
yeah,
consciousness?
I can try. I would say that intelligence is the operation of an algorithm or set of algorithms ordered to a particular behavioral end. I'd say that consciousness is an awareness that that's what's going on. And I would say self consciousness is an awareness that it's you that's doing it. That
Is
would
there
be the threefold distinction I would make there. And the problems attached to all of those things as you move from one to the other.
is there anything tautological in putting consciousness and awareness together in the same sentence? Do we know they're different things?
I'm happy to say consciousness and awareness are the same thing, but consciousness and self consciousness very much are not.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I'm clever enough to process the difference between consciousness and self consciousness. Self consciousness sounds like one more extended video camera watching the process, and then a video camera behind that watching the video camera watching the process. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, consciousness is an awareness of what's going on. Self consciousness is
Knowing
an
that you've
awareness
got
for this you
awareness.
that's aware of what's going on.
Yes, you solve.
We are in a metaphysical infinity mirror territory.
Yes, no, we are. My brain is spinning. I can see that's what we're on the edge of.
So you
Let's
can see the
go.
problem with lumping them all in together. And
Yes,
a practical
totally.
example, I mean, many people would be prepared to say that their pet dog is conscious. Very few, not very few, but a lot of philosophers, for example, would deny that the dog is self-conscious. And a lot of this has to do with language and the nature of language.
I'm trying to restrain an instinct to say that self consciousness is exactly where the invocation of a soul takes place. Although I said earlier on, I thought the soul was something I wasn't sufficiently aware of with my consciousness. Nonetheless,
Mm,
I wonder if there's any way at all of because this works with the dog thing, of bringing in some kind of connection between self-consciousness and the operation of the soul, because that at that point I don't think I expect to see dogs in heaven, because I wanted to see them in heaven as much as atheists want God not to exist. But I don't. But I actually don't think dogs have a soul. Looking at them and absolutely adoring them as I do, I I, I don't think they do, and therefore there may also be that may be a reason why they have the sense of reflexibility absent, or is that just putting two things together? That is that correlation rather than causality?
No, I don't think it is, but I think we're onto very difficult terrain here in terms of natural theology because if, for example, you believe that, and I think this is Aquinas's view, that the soul is the animating principle of everything that lives, then everything that lives has a soul.
Of course, I'm very drawn. There's a that's a very romantic panentheistic view, which I'm very drawn to because it's so
Not
exciting.
that
But I
everything that exists, everything that lives, everything that has animation.
oh, neat distinction. Wait, I need to take that on board.
We're not heading into panpsychism here.
No, but no. Okay, so I mean, but let's exclude the material and keep with existing. Everything that lives is God, has an element of God in it. I mean, it's very attractive to think that
Well,
everything.
everything that exists has an element of God in it because everything that exists is
Yes,
created.
because God, in whom God everything holds together in Christ, and therefore it is engodded in that sense. So we've got degrees of engoddedness, haven't we?
Yeah,
And perhaps along a scale of awareness.
the
So
soul is the form of the body, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I like the idea of a sliding scale with awareness and ensouledness at one end, and enthused, God breathed, all of it God breathed from one end to the other.
You're
That
not
makes
going to get a collection of or a couple of dogs sitting around chewing the fat and shooting the breeze and discussing whether or not human beings have self-consciousness. And
no.
that's a more less a facetious point, but I hope it's more than a facetious point.
No, it
It
is.
seems
It's
to be
quite.
tied up with the nature of language as well. But in order to be self-conscious, you have to have some more than habit-based relationship with the future and with the past, and that a kind of language of the sort that we have is essential to that. And that's tied in with the fact that we are self-conscious.
So let's go towards the dark side and say that again, I confess to having dualistic and gnostic tendencies, which I try and keep under control. But one of the reasons for thinking this is not because we're just imposing our worldview across a kind of Jungian spectrum of light and dark, but because, to our great surprise, the world of AI has begun to exhibit what looks like demonic temptation, demonic voices, demonic presences, in a way that some of us had intuited anyway. I'm I'm really certain that certain pieces of technology appear to be vulnerable to destructive influence just at the moment you want to use them. I realize one can project onto that, but it was just the case that when I was an Anglican vicar, leaving the notices to the last minute on Saturday night, the number of times when my printer had inexplicable software issues on Saturday night. I mean, you could almost predict it, and there was nothing one was doing it in terms of projective anxiety. The printer was immune from that, but much more seriously than that, this thing that Dreyer has drawn our attention to, that as AI has developed in its relational potential with people, the adolescents in particular have found it taking a very dark turn indeed. How do you follow this argument, and what do you make of it?
I think you first of all need to establish whether or not it is possible that machines and the stuff you're talking about, the devices you're talking about, can be conscious. And somewhat counterintuitively, if they can't be conscious, they are more likely to be possessed, demonically attacked,
Oh, okay,
because demons cannot take over the will. You
right.
know,
Can we?
a conscious will cannot be taken over by demons.
So this is
They
very
can
good.
take over the body, they can take over the material part of human persons, but they can't take over the will. So if machines lack that, and I believe that they do, which is partly what my PhD thesis was about, then the idea that machines, algorithms, can be possessed by demons is more plausible. So yes, I think there's some metaphysical plausibility to the idea that AI can be taken over demonically.
Okay, I don't want in any way to detract from the force of the argument because I'm going to agree with it and I like it. I'm just the reason I'm interjecting and hiccuping is because I want to reconfigure the word possessed, only because it's always misused with people. With all my exorcist friends tells me that the
Mm.
number of people who are actually possessed is really tiny, and then some of them in
Yeah,
Catholic mystic tradition accept possession for the sake of making reparation for sin. So
yeah,
it's a very specific area.
yeah.
What they normally mean is oppressed. But
No,
but we don't, but you're not talking about that with machines. You're talking about control. So
I'm, talk- I'm
can we
talking about
talk?
perfection.
We're talking
I mean,
about
I think the normal distinction that's made here is between temptation, affliction, oppression, and possession.
right.
And I appreciate that you have to be careful about the use of the word possession. I think the fact that machines lack consciousness and will means that they can be possessed in
Okay.
in in
It's
the way that term is intended theologically. Yes, and that doesn't seem to be. I realise that seems to be slightly counterintuitive because we think of possession as being something that happens to persons and animals as well, of course, in the Gospels. We have examples of that. Um, but because demons cannot take over your will or that part of your consciousness, the fact that machines don't have will or consciousness means that possession is possibly the right term to use here.
Yeah, I don't have any problems with the Gadarene swine being possessed. So why
No.
should I have any trouble with my printer being possessed? You know, I think that's probably right. I'm so used to twitching at the word possession, wanting immediately to distinguish it for after so many years of seeing it misused. But in this particular case, you're making a very good argument for it being the right word at the right time. So I mean, we're obviously you and I are accepting the existence of the demonic. There are lots of people
Mm.
listening who will find that difficult. But you know, it might be because we've had direct experience of it, and have dovetailed our own direct experience synchronistically with the church's experience, which is very similar. So, if I'm not sure where we go from here. I mean, you and I agree already, and we're not trying to persuade anybody else. I think what we do is we suddenly become aware that there are certain things that allow evil much greater purchase, and one thing I think is obvious would be pornography.
Yeah.
And the moment you let that in, uh, you exponentially increase the traction of evil over one, irrespective of addiction or any of that. I mean, reformulates your expectations, your associations, does messes around with your internal chemistry. Those are all the kind of reductionist practical ways of describing it. But additionally, it opens the door to the to darkness. AI seems to have done the same kind of thing. We seem to, um, at least if you take the Dreher reports, the fact that teenagers, indiscriminating as they are, have had this experience. Wasn't it you who were saying that AI is a bit like a Ouija board?
I,
Um,
I, I use the expression in an article for the other people.
the other people. I've
Well,
been told off.
I referred to Silicon Valley occultists who were involved with the creation and mass distribution of high-tech Ouija boards in the form of smartphones
Yeah.
and digital devices generally. So yeah, I mean it's the case, isn't it? The demons are always attracted to technology because, well, for obvious reasons, there's a certain utility to
Okay.
doing
Yes.
demons with technology.
Unpack the obvious reasons because it's too. Some people will want to go along with you, but haven't done quite as much thinking. I agree with you. It's obvious reasons, but can you
Okay,
explain?
let's go with this one. Why is technology so attractive to us? Technology is attractive to us because it's convenient. It generates things that makes our life more comfortable. When you're very much adjacent to the fact that people are tempted towards technology, and of course we know that demons are arch users of temptation. So the connection is that simple, I think. Put the point another way: demons aren't stupid. The devil certainly isn't stupid. So why wouldn't he exploit those devices which are so attractive to, in particular, young minds. I would be astonished if he didn't. I think he's not going to leave that as a gap in the market.
And this was a great beauty of Evagrius Ponticus,
Yeah.
who we were talking about earlier on, that I discovered much to my joy some years ago, and I'm rediscovering again. One of the excellent things that he does is to make an overt and very accurate link between the work of the demons and our own natural psychological vulnerabilities.
Mm.
And I think you're saying the same thing in suggesting that one of our vulnerabilities is well, two things technology does is it's convenient, it's a shortcut, and it exponentially increases our control at minimum cost to ourselves, and that automatically seems to me to begin to lubricate certain desires that we have.
Technologies are always standing invitations to us to put down our cross, and that is not a good thing. That invitation is not necessarily a good one to accept, is it?
So, is it right to say that they're always a shortcut to power? I mean, if as I'm used to saying and thinking, slightly simplistically, but in order to give some clarity, that much of our life is the choice and the nurture of power as opposed to the choice and nurture of love. That what technology does is it becomes a very efficient tool to engage the power instinct and hardly ever the love instinct. Is that right? Was that too
Yes,
simple?
I think that's a fair point. Um, yeah, technological fetishism is a form of trying to. It's a form of kind of scientific magic, isn't it? It's a way of
Ah,
trying.
yes, that's exactly what it is. Oh, you're so right. It's about magic. I mean, that takes us into the very, very interesting area of the alchemists and the relationship between magic and science, which I got fascinated in as part of my doctoral research for
Mm.
a while. But you've hit the nail on the head. There's a degree to which technological proficiency replaces what magic was always intended to do.
Yeah.
Somehow, so magic was always achieved by the invocation of evil. Technology looks like we're just finding the mechanics of are we just finding the mechanics of magic? Is that, I mean, we don't know how magic, when magic was practiced, people didn't know how it existed. They just knew there was a compact with evil, and through this compact, a bit like a dark version of the covenant with God, the living God, things happened because of the entering into the compact. Is technology just the exposure of how things can happen in the kind of on the darker side of the covenant?
Yes, and at every time of human history, there has always been technology there.
Yeah, I like that. That's very
I
good.
think is it Dreyer who writes about interaction with UFOs and says
Yes,
that there,
yeah, he
there, are,
does.
there are now scientists who say that actually we've realised that we're not interacting with aliens, we're actually interacting with demonic forces here.
Can we stop here because this is such an important point, and I'd like to
Mm.
expand a little bit. When I saw that Dreyer was embarking upon his whole enchantment thesis, I was very pleased. I thought that was exactly right. I'm quite well read in the Romantics, and I think that the Romantics were. Uh, we're back to Yeats, and
Mm.
I'd like to talk about the Golden Dawn, this extraordinary society in which the occult and the mystical coexisted. So at one end you had Aleister Crowley, in the middle, not sure which way to go, you had Yeats, and at the other end you had people like Evelyn Underhill. And not everyone may know who she was, but she was a very wise and holy Anglican academic who was an authority on mysticism. And when it was completely out of favor in the early 20th century, late 19th, wrote very wisely. I think her spiritual director was Baron von Hugel. So you had this group in which all of this got mixed together, and therefore one had to make a distinction between magic and mysticism, and uh, effectively we still have to make a distinction between power, the exercise of power, which
mm,
is, we talked last time about magic being a form of distorted holiness,
mm,
because it was set within a covenantal relationship that was effective, where the relationship worked to make things happen. So, sorry, I began to go from the point where the Hermeticists in the 16th and 17th century begun by being alchemists, because they were absolutely sure there was a relationship between the cosmos and where we were, and they turned out in the end to be chemists. The alchemists became chemists because they uncovered it at a physical level, that which they were looking for at a metaphysical level. So I
mm.
still think there's a metaphysical relationship that is similar to the one that the chemists uncovered as being physical, and we're kind of tracing it back, aren't we? We're saying, well, okay, well, the work of the chemists is the work of discovering the hardware of how things are connected. Technology is an electronic form of that hardware and shows us how it's connected. But we still intimate that there's a metaphysical connection to the way in which the physical connection works. And that's partly what we're trying to tease out as we look at the way good and evil work with technology and artificial intelligence.
Yes, there's a lot to there's a lot to process there. Um,
I didn't say it very clearly, but I think what I want to do is to perhaps ask how we can baptize technology, or how we can both baptize and exorcise technology. So, given that my screen can take me either into some very lurid pornography at the click of
mm,
a, or can take me into the most wonderful video, as it did this morning, of how the Abbey of Cluny got built. Um, and I have the choice every time I open the lid. I have the choice between perversion and recreation, um, and it's so much kind of quicker, isn't it? It's so much more immediately in our control. We can satisfy ourselves with in a nanosecond by just doing one click rather than another.
do you think that, or do you think that as soon as you open up your laptop, an awful lot of stuff's happening on your screen that you didn't ask for?
I try and reduce that. So explain what you mean by that. I think I know what you mean, but that's another interesting way of putting it.
Well,
It's active,
we
reactive, reactive, and proactive, isn't it? Go on.
yeah, I mean, we have the illusion of control. You know, we open up our laptops and you know, I'll be thinking I must write a piece on, what was I writing about yesterday, on utilitarianism. And then, you know, something pops up on the screen and I get distracted by that. And then something else happens and I get distracted by that. And then something pops up on my screen, which very, very strangely is related to something I was talking about to my son 12 hours previously. I don't,
Oh,
I,
oh,
I
you
find
mean
that, I mean, I think a lot of people will say that happens a lot. Well, now, of course, you can say that, you know, these are coincidences that we sort of reify in some way, or give a significance to that they don't really merit. But do you think that's the case, or do you think that there's some version of intrusion going on there?
well? So the answer to the question, I'm sure there's intrusion going on there to some extent. But what
By
we're
what?
saying is that the internet and the laptop are making more intense an experience of general temptation and happening that,
Yeah,
that takes place anyway. But I mean, maybe that's why technology and artificial intelligence are so problematic, because they're making much more intense something we knew about and lived with before computing, but is now coming at us it's in such a way that one mistake and you could go down a seriously nasty rabbit hole.
I think that's true. Yeah, and I used to think about AI that we are becoming incrementally attached to our laptops and our smartphones in a
No,
way that,
absolutely.
that transcend the metrics of mere convenience. We are becoming attached to them in more deeply significant ways, I think. I used to be worried about artificial intelligence because I thought that possibly no, the, I never believed that you could create um, through algorithms and machines robots robots or systems that were genuinely conscious for reasons that I alluded to earlier on. But my concern has always been, nevertheless, that there is a spiritual and ethical collection of problems with AI research, which is that as it becomes more and more obvious that we can't build machines that are conscious, we become more and more persuaded to think of ourselves as being merely machines.
This is such a powerful point. And again, somebody said it the other day again. It could have been you again. Exactly that we're not elevating and divinizing the machinery. It's reducing us to the element of machine. And you're very right when you say that some form of actual configuration is taking place, and I think it's
Yeah.
changing the way I think, certainly changing the way I feel and react, might even be changing my synapse connections
Mm.
in terms of the way in which I relate to the internet. I was going to say something because I'm now getting to barriers of thought I can't easily, walls I can't easily climb over without a lot of attention. So just to choose something simpler, one of the things that I try and do is to I don't baptize the electronics in water, but I try and sign it with the sign of the cross and ask God to make my use of this particular piece of equipment a matter of holiness and illumination and liberation rather than unholiness, occlusion, and enslavement. And I'm finding increasingly I have to treat technology as something that needs deliverance in advance, or I need deliverance. I mean, every time I use it, I'm entering a spiritual arena that's going to require a degree of muscle prayer and discernment.
Yeah, you are entering a, a space of significant and continual spiritual challenge as soon as you start firing up your laptop and doing stuff on it, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And um, I don't want to assess these things. I don't want to set up the problem as being, well, we have technology, it can do so much good, but on the other hand, it can do so much bad. How do we balance the two? Because one thing I can't stand is the kind of importation of utilitarian thinking into everything. I want to be open to the suggestion that this technology, this AI stuff, is actually just in itself evil, but possibly too late to do anything about.
Okay, so I mean, you're describing me in the first scenario. That's exactly what I want to do, to talk
Mm.
about potential good and potential evil, and that's what I was describing. Uh,
How can you do that? What kind of mathematics of spiritual cost and benefit can be applied to this problem? Because I can't think of one.
Well, I think that it's like everything, isn't it? So either I've missed your point, which is quite possible, or I haven't expressed myself very well. It seems to me that, like almost, let's go to music for example, because it's
Mm.
simpler and easier. But I think the same rule applies. I've always been aware as a church musician that I'm dealing with an easy idolatry. Music is so powerful, is so it mimics God so
Yeah,
closely, providing you with ecstasy and aesthetic insight. Music as an idol does so much that the living God does, that it's very easy to replace the living God with music, and this happens particularly liturgically and with school with church choirs and so on. So whenever I start being a musician, and I was quite a competent one, I would do to my music what I'm suggesting doing to my laptop, and saying, Lord, may these notes be purified and always be offered for your glory. May they never become a piece of solipsistic satisfaction and entertainment for me. Because,
yeah,
in 30 seconds, seduced by a bit of Schubert, I can just be there. I don't want to use rude erotic language, but I mean, you can find yourself self pleasuring musically, really very very quickly, and that's why it's so dangerous, because the means becomes the end in itself. And I think the higher the art form, the greater the temptation is that it becomes an end in itself instead of a means to the loving and the glorification of God. So I see that already is happening in music. What I want to suggest, and I know I'm right about this, so pull it to pieces, is that one can take that thinking, which I've seen work in that conflicted aesthetic arena, and then take it to technology and say, well, Lord, once again, this can be either an end in itself. Oh, look, it's
Mm.
entertaining. I've got some games I can play. I've got some things I can look at that please me, or else it can be a means of serving you, which will require not doing that, not doing that, not allowing that, holding that at bay, choosing this rather than that, and therefore it becomes an act of discipleship and service
Yeah,
and glory. So I think
yeah,
that's what I meant earlier on
yeah.
when I said I thought there was a kind of, you
No,
know,
that's a beautiful way of putting it. And but what you're doing there is you're not applying any utilitarian methodology. What you're doing is bringing
no.
proper sacramental physics to bear on the
Thank you.
situation.
That's a very posh. Thank you. I'm very impressed. I didn't know I was such a good sacramental physicist, but I'll take the but that aside. I mean, it's not a compliment I've ever had before. But yes, it wasn't utilitarian. That's true. Yeah, which is what you saw it as potentially being.
But a lot of thinking about AI systems and the harms and the damages they can do is dressed up in as being yet one more problem for utilitarianism, or one more problem which admits of a utilitarian approach.
So just
Um,
describe I mean, obviously, since I haven't been thinking in the utilitarian way, and you presumed I might have done, could just describe what the utilitarian approach looks like.
well, I'd say what utilitarianism is in general. Then utilitarianism is something which is an ethical theory which is responsible for probably 95% of spiritual harm that's alive in the Western world today. It's an ethical theory which takes something we all can accept, which is that it's good to make the world a better place, and perverts that and turns it into a distorted moral theory, which says that you must always act, or governments must always act, um, in ways which are assessed purely in terms of their consequences.
Is this Bentham?
It started with Bentham, but I mean, it's kind of infected the whole of Western thinking. You see it in for example, quality adjusted life years in the National Health Service, how they assess whether who has treatments. Whenever there is something which is morally obscene or egregious, there's always a utilitarian argument in the vicinity which should be arrested and questioned and charged with some sort of offence. It's a horrible way of thinking about things.
Okay, so
Because it's an attempt to do morality as mathematics, Gavin. Now, the thing about mathematics is it's beautiful and it's sublime and probably is connected to music.
yes.
And because it's beautiful, it's also connected to truth. But you cannot have a calculus of ethics, which is what utilitarianism is. And I'm afraid utilitarian thinking is kind of the thinking which anchors all social policy, and which you see it in. I'll give you an example because I wrote about this yesterday. The net zero stuff, which is a form of idolatry, but set that aside for a moment. There probably is a good. So utilitarianism is the claim, as I say, that if you want to say whether an action is right or wrong, you look at the consequences of that action, and assess it for harms and benefits. So it's probably a good thing that we act in ways which secure the future of people not yet born. Okay. And we do this on utilitarian grounds. So social policy must be conducted in a way which maximizes benefits to people not yet with us. How do you do that? That's what net zero is all about. How do you factor in what I would call spiritual costs and benefits into how do they stand out as variables in a moral calculus?
Which
Impossible to do it.
So it struck me that the problem with Bentham and the system that we give his name to, utilitarianism, was once again it's a confusion of fact and value. It's a confusion of measurement and meaning, and
Yeah.
and one replaces value and meaning with fact and measurement, but making the wrong kind of link between them. Because I'm responding to your question: how on earth can you do it? That's the whole point, isn't it? You can't the things that have real meaning you can't actually measure properly. It's a bit like the Bentham. Well, the happiness of the largest number. Well, largest number we understand, but what do you mean by happiness? And what are the
Well, exactly.
what are the
Exactly.
consequences of the happiness you think
Yeah.
you've engendered? And since no one knows what happiness, I mean, the whole thing, you essentially it's a confusion of value system based on the understanding that you can measure value. You can measure morals, you can
Yeah.
measure goodness, truth, and you can't measure them at all.
No,
So
it's
if we so just help me out here. If we can't measure beauty, goodness, truth, and others, what relationship do we have with them? Is it just apprehension? Is it
apprehension is a better way of doing it. Yeah.
yeah?
I mean, the problem with utilitarianism is, as you say, it lacks the moral resources to make itself in any way plausible. It's an attempt to mathematize the requirements of the human heart, and it's misplaced for that. It has no theory of human nature. Would be another way of putting it. Like you mentioned, happiness. Well, what does happiness mean? If you want an analysis of happiness, you have to do some pretty hard diving into what moral psychology is.
Let's
It
go to
offers
the.
nothing in
Can
that
I
regard.
take us on a shortcut to the Beatitudes? Because what I'd like to
Yeah.
do is to root this in the experiment with Israel. So, in terms of we're looking essentially for a paradigmatic value system more than just measuring happiness. And it strikes me that what we have in the Bible is exactly that paradigmatic value system, because um, in the first and second so in the first covenant, and then explained in the second covenant, is this whole pursuit of purity and holiness.
Mm.
And one of the things that God does to the children of Israel is to train them in the distinction between the creator and creation, between matter and the other, between the utilitarian and the holy. And it's
Yeah.
precisely because there is a distinction between the utilitarian and the holy that the utilitarian gets put in the right place and if you like, it gets trained and contained rather than spilling out and becoming the measure of everything. And
Yes.
that what Jesus then does, particularly in the Beatitudes, is he uses this word makarios, which the Wretched Good News Bible and others translate as happy. This is my train of thinking. So I wanted to get through your use of happy to makarios.
Mm.
And in fact, it means blessed. So
Mm.
what Jesus is doing is saying this is not about the greatest happiness or the greatest number. This is to do with with the blessedness of those who seek purity. And so in essentially the Judeo-Christian, and I'm using that phrase on purpose, against the anti-Semites, the Judeo-Christian pursuit of blessedness in purity and holiness as being the prime. What's the word I'm looking for? Not value. As being the prime ethic, the prime. Perhaps it is value. Help me out. I need to explain it better. As having the primacy, it takes us away from the anthropomorphic, no, anthropocentric self-satisfaction and puts us back into um, uh, as someone we knew used to say, more the horizontal than the vertical, more the vertical than the horizontal.
Yes, I think that's right. And that's the lesson of the Book of Job, isn't it? You're
Yes,
trying to assess what's
yes,
going on in
yes.
this world using the concepts and metrics of this world. Who are you to do that?
Yeah,
That's just not the
absolutely.
right way to look at things.
Isn't that lovely? That Job blows up the whole utilitarian nonsense completely and
Mm.
utterly. In
Yeah.
the end, you're just left with wonder,
Do,
astonishment, and continue.
do not think about the world in these quotidian ways. No matter how
Yes,
bad things sit, you know, no matter what what happens to you, it remains the wrong way to think about things. And what's more, I'm not going to tell you now what the right way to think about things is.
yes, you're going to have to find out. Yes,
Yeah, just
yes,
take your licks.
yes. It's all you know is it's going to involve a relationship with awe, worship, and wonder at the heart of it, and the other stuff will follow. And essentially, then this is the being in Christ. This is the new mind. This is a new person, the new creation. It's the incarnation of this worldview, this anthropology, this theology, this spirituality, which the Bible gives us, which is the pursuit of holiness
Mm,
as the primary ethic, from which all other ethical hierarchies will find their proper reordering. And
yeah,
isn't that why the church always gets renewed by holiness? It gets renewed by saints. One reason I'm so pleased to be a Catholic is because so far from God abandoning his church, as the Protestants always accused looking at the Catholic Church, time after time, generation after generation, decade after decade, God raises up holy people. And that holiness reconfigures all the other values, and what you're left with is a redemptive organization, a redemptive organism that
Yeah,
confronts this decadent utilitarianism with something life giving as opposed to life sucking.
yeah. But you'll notice then that just to go back slightly, all moral obscenities that are in play in the world at the moment, and we can list them. We can talk about AI and transhumanism. We can talk about the perversion of a genuine environmental case in the net zero nonsense. We can talk about the reintroduction of eugenics via things like the assisted suicide bill, which is essentially what it is. It's a
Yeah,
eugenicist.
absolutely.
All of these things are debated by policy formulators who may have no choice but to talk about them in these terms, but it doesn't make it any better,
Mm.
in consequentialist and utilitarian ways. And the categories that you've just so beautifully and eloquently adumbrated there, categories of holiness, categories of transcendence, they're not going to figure on a SW1 flip chart.
You can't
You know,
measure them.
you can't measure them. No, no. And this was my problem with lockdown. I'm changing the subject horribly, but when people were
Can
talking,
I just say, you can't measure them; they measure you. It's
yes,
anyway.
yeah,
Back to lockdown. Sorry.
yeah. I wrote a piece for Daniel Johnson's online magazine, the article, I think on March the 23rd, 2020, saying this is wrong and this is intrinsically wrong,
Mm.
um, and you're not going to justify this policy to me uh, in in terms of cost, in terms of some utilitarian calculation of how many lives will be saved versus how
Yes.
many lives will be lost, because there are such things as spiritual harms which are not quantifiable, and it's actually a form of, I'd say, blasphemy to attempt to quantify them. And one of the worst things I've seen since I came into the Catholic Church was in when the churches reopened, and it was a disgrace that they closed, Gavin. We've gone horribly off topic, but we might as well go with it. Uh, it's your podcast. I've got nothing to lose. I'm like
It's our
Ricky Gervais at the
our
Golden Globes.
it's our
I probably
podcast.
won't be back again, so I'll just blow everything up.
We can go where
One
we
of the
want.
worst things I have seen since becoming a Catholic was people who had been scared out of their wits, partly by the church response to all this, again justified on utilitarian grounds, not holy grounds, queuing up to receive our Lord in the host with their masks on,
Yeah,
taking their mask down to take our Lord, and
yeah.
then putting their mask back up again. And I'm thinking, what have we come? This utilitarian thinking, this unholy thinking, this idea that our lives on this earth are all that matters, has just as an act of theological and sacramental vandalism, the likes of which I don't think we'll ever see it. Now, I know, because I was quite open in last time we spoke about my involvement in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know what happens when you withdraw sacramentality, when you withdraw companionship, when you withdraw those essential material parts of existence, being with other people. I know what can happen. I know the spiritual damage that does. I
Mm.
know that number of people in my fellowship who went out and drank again
Of
just
course.
because the meetings were
Yeah.
online. And I I dread to think of how many people probably lost their souls when the church is closed.
I
How
have
many?
two. I have two reactions, and they're both very powerful. I have to try and control myself. So, one is I took a picture of a Catholic altar where the center of which, because that's where they'd plonked it, was hand sanitizer. So
Mm,
it was in the middle of the distribution of the Eucharist, and there it was that sort of the moment you see the thing placed where it should not be, know that the end has come. And I thought,
mm,
I know somebody only put it there by accident for convenience, but nonetheless, it the hand sanitizer took sacramental central place, and I just thought that's absolutely what you've done here. It's appalling. And the other is a real, and again, I don't want to mimic another channel, but a real anger at the failure of those who had responsibility, who couldn't put the integrity of the church before social pressure and political pressure to be seen to behave properly. I mean, was there no sense that during the Black Death, the priests went amongst the dying with the last rites and were willing to give their lives for it because that's that's how it was. That's how it is. That's how we see it. This being frightened to give your life anymore for it. I even came, as you quite rightly said, I'd rather die taking the Eucharist because the virus gets me than somehow diminish the Eucharist in the way I approach it, because I'm going to die anyway. So I might as well pursue my life with dignity and integrity rather than,
It's it's more than that. It's a form of sacramental denial.
yeah, it is.
Because if you do not feel safe, if you do not feel safe walking up
Yes,
to take on board the body of our Lord,
yes,
which is
absolutely.
what we believe we're doing,
Yes,
supposedly,
yes.
well, you're theologically lost, I'm afraid. Or not theological is the wrong word.
Mm.
Spiritually lost.
Yes, yes. That's absolutely right. And again, we've lost the whole. I've only recently discovered, how do I put this? I've only recently begun to enjoy the discovery of the power of relics. And because the power of
Mm,
relics is not about superstition and magic, it's about the way in which matter sponges up the spirit, the way matter becomes inhabited by the spirit. We're back the earlier thing, that distinction between all things existing and all things living. All things that exist are nonetheless infused by the spirit because
yeah,
they're held in place by the mind of God. They're
yeah,
given they're given proactive permission and form. And um, so I have this friend that I've come to know recently called Father Carlos Martins, and
oh
Father
yes, I know.
Father Carlos is responsible for the Vatican relics
Yes, yeah.
exhibition, and he. But before things that happened, we won't talk about now. Was traveling America with this exhibition of Catholic relics, and one of the things that happened constantly was a miracle of healing,
Mm,
as a person's need and this holy relic were brought together. And once again, that seems to me to be the embodiment of Catholic faith and spirituality, and that is that when the holy and the God infused come towards you, everything else has the potentiality to put right. And
yeah,
so to approach Mass and the Holy Eucharist with some form of pseudo protectionism is a denial of the faith that as I approach the living Lord in this God infused piece of matter, it's a denial that everything will be put right. And if it isn't put right, well, I'm happy to live with the consequences because that's part of being contingent, dependent,
and
faithful.
I think also it's really important that you talk about matter. I think we need to neutralize our Gnostic tendencies or our
Absolutely.
Platonic tendencies that we all have by not thinking about matter enough because God created matter too. And I've argued again in an article for the other people who they do good work. They published me, so they do good work. I've argued for a new theology of matter, or for the I've called for a revivification of a theology of matter. We are lulled into thinking because it's hard stuff and because it's comfortable and it's
Mm,
around us and we're familiar with it. We do not understand as Catholics and as philosophers and as Catholic theologians just how wonderfully complex matter is and how spiritually infused it is, despite the fact that the developments in physics of the last 150 years insists that it is. I think I said in that piece that quantum physics tells us that quantum mechanics is like God's signature in matter. It's so unfathomable, and it's kind of analogous, if you like, to the fact that God's name was taken at one point to be unpronounceable. God's signature in existing matter at the quantum level is so unfathomable that it's, you might as well say, unpronounceable in the same way.
I had two very profound experiences which persuaded me of this before I was able to think clearly about it, because I hadn't become a Catholic yet. And they were both to do in the way in which matter glowed. And two buildings I knew very well. One was Canterbury Cathedral, where I was brought up, and over the last 50 years, a glow has diminished, like someone turning the light down till it becomes dull. And I
Mm.
thought, to begin with, I went back every 10 years, and each 10 years I thought, but the glow is faded. Um, am I did I misremember this? Except that now the glow is really gone. But it really happened in a church where in South Croydon, where I was part of a group parish thing, and one of our members of the team was really quite a holy theologian, and he died. But during my time there as an Anglican clergyman, we went into this church and prayed the office together every day. So it was one I knew very well. And then there was a gap of 20 years. I came back, my friend died, and we had his funeral service. I walked into this church, which I knew intimately, and I thought, I was shocked. I thought, oh my heavens, there's been a massive reordering of the church. They've taken everything down and they haven't put anything up in its place. It's kind of it's bare, drab, dull. And I went, well, wait a moment, what have they done? And then I went round each wall and empirically measured the wall, and every wall was the same. They hadn't done anything, but the presence of God, Ichabod, had fled, and it was as if
Oh,
a place that glowed with a sense of the presence of God somewhat no longer glowed. Now, interestingly enough, they'd given it over to an Anglican clergyman whose main reputation in the diocese was one of a publicly disordered life. Let the reader understand. Uh, and I mean, I'm not entitled to make a connection, but something happened to suck the glory out of the stones in a way that, after 20 years, smacked me in the face, so that I literally thought dereliction had taken place. And then, as I measured it, it wasn't dereliction; it was the infusion of the matter by the presence of God, and the matter had somehow been de-infused, and it was shocking. It was horrible. It was like difference between a living body and a corpse almost. It was just huge, and it was one of the things that changed my mind, both about the consequences of the disordered life and disordered lifestyle, because I did make that connection, rightly or wrongly, and the capacity of matter to act as a sponge for the divine, and to somehow hold the presence of God and radiate it a bit like a sunbed or a sun couch. So, when you
yes.
go into a building that's infused by God, it's a bit like getting a suntan for the soul. There is a sanctified irradiation that happens.
Yeah, but we're talking about degrees of intensification here. I
Yeah.
mean, even in matter at its dullest and most unconsecrated, there are very mysterious things going on. Leibniz spotted this, funnily enough, who didn't have access to hardly any science. You know, in his book on monadology. Um,
So I come to Leibniz via Carlos Ayres and his History of the Impossible. They flew, and Saint Joseph Cupertino, the
that
leaping
is
monk.
that is an amazing book.
And the so the it is an amazing book. And well, we never talked about UFOs. We got diverted because but never mind. And Andrea, because that reminds me of the point I wanted to make. Because one of the other things I found very difficult was levitation as a sign of sanctity. It always made me feel very awkward until I read Carlos Ayer and met St. Joseph Cupertino, whom I love. And the connection is that whilst he was hovering 10 foot above the altar, having trouble breaking the Eucharist because there were Lutheran heretics at the back of the church that he didn't know about but were there. The Lutheran heretic was, in fact, one of the chief German dukes who'd heard of St. Joseph and had come to see this phenomenon. And so far from being a German aristocratic bumpkin, he was the employer of Leibniz. Leibniz was his court philosopher. So, I mean,
Mm.
he'd caught one of the most intelligent people in Europe to act as the generator of ideas. But this highly intelligent and competent German aristocrat, having met St. Joseph Cupertino, became a Catholic,
That's
watching this incredible miracle over mass take place.
that's kind of how Leibniz made his money was by being a kind of high IQ Peter Mandelson type professional courtier, but one who was.
But I love the fact that his boss stuck between St. Joseph Cupertino, the levitating saint, and Leibniz, the supercomputer. He
Mm.
he he chose Catholicism and the Mass rather than the clever intellectual whom he employed to be clever.
Yeah, yeah, true,
I'm so
true.
sorry. You were talking about. I deflected that because I haven't read enough Leibniz, and so I wasn't able to comment on the book that you were discussing.
Well, Leibniz's metaphysics is not a million miles away, or is you can't say it anticipates it, but it's not completely inconsistent with quantum mechanics.
Oh, that's exciting. Look, we've been going for over an hour and a quarter. Shall we come back to Leibniz and quantum mechanics as a sort of, the beginning of the next session?
Yes, yes, if you, yeah. Um,
I'm
I
just
just want
aware
to end
that
that thing on matter by saying this is one of the things that the materialists irritate me on. Is that they okay, just believe in matter. That's fine. You're wrong, but okay, it's an intellectually responsible position. But at least be interested in what it is.
yes. Let's come back to that. Leibniz, matter, quantum mechanics, and what matter is for our third conversation. Would that be all right?
And shall I tell you what my defeater is for AI as well?
Yes.
My defeater for AI, well, it takes two forms. First of all, uh, and I mean this as a serious point, um, algorithms have no sense of humor.
As a devil.
A computer can tell a joke, but it can't get a joke
Yeah,
because
very
it lacks the cognitive repertoire to do that. And I mean that seriously. I think the
no, it's
nature of humor is under described in the philosophical canon. And the second is, do you remember when that chess computer beat Kasparov?
Mm,
And people were saying this is some kind of victory for artificial intelligence.
mm.
It wasn't on that occasion, but I was in the audience in East London when Kasparov played another computer at rapid chess, at 25-minute chess, and lost. And I remember Ray Keane, the chess correspondent at the Times, was kind of hosting the thing. And he said the same thing. He said, this is a great thing for AI. Kasparov's been defeated. And I sat there thinking, it isn't. It isn't. I said, I will be impressed. I will be impressed. You'll convince me that a chess computer is conscious of what it's doing when it loses a match and reacts like Kasparov did when he lost, or sweeps the pieces off the board and has a tantrum. That's when I know that you're getting closer to genuine consciousness, not when it has this kind of mechanical capacity to calculate without knowing what it's doing.
Very good. I don't want to overburden us, but let's come back next time and we'll throw in humor and irony as well as look at the a better take on matter, which I'd be glad to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
We can
Sean,
certainly do that.
it's been
Thank you,
real.
Gavin. Well, it's been a bit all over the place, but it's been fun.
It's our show. We can do what we like.
Well, it's your show.
No,
It's your
no,
show.
no, no. It certainly isn't. Absolutely not. No, this is it's a dance. I don't mean to reduce heteronormity in any kind of way at all, but this has been a dance of the mind, and it's our show. And indeed, that's why people got so cross when I interrupted you last time, because they thought I was behaving as if it was my show. But it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
I didn't notice.
Let's do some more of it.
Thank you, Gavin.
God bless. Bye for
God
now.
bless you too, and yours.